Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on local government reorganisation. I'm Councillor Julia McShane, Leader of Guildford Borough Council.
And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Paul Follows, Leader of Waverley Borough Council.
So today we'll be discussing local government reorganisation, and this is the first in a series of sessions for people across Guildford and Waverley, where we'll be telling you a little bit more about what's going on, what it means for local organisations like yours, and then answering any questions that you may have. The government is currently running a consultation on this, and this will be your only chance to have your say. We know that how local government is structured may not seem important, but across Surrey, councils are providing services that local people rely on every day, like council homes, waste collection, education, and social care for children and the elderly. The most important thing about this session is that it's a chance for you to ask any questions that you may have. And so most of our time today is going to be doing this. Please use the Q&A function to do this, and use this section to upvote other questions that you want answering. If we don't get around to answering your questions, don't worry. We'll take these away and ensure that they are answered via the FAQs on our website.
So why reorganise local government in the first place? Now, this is a process that has been initiated by central government to change how councils are structured. Now, that was a central government policy that here in Surrey has then been initiated by Surrey County Council. In areas like Surrey, where there are two tiers of local government, and in large parts of, or certainly all of Waverley and a decent proportion of Guildford, where there are actually three tiers of local government, LGR looks at whether a new structure creating, which is fewer structures, larger councils called unitary authorities, makes sense. Now, this is a well-trodden path in recent years, and in the past decade, this has happened in Dorset, Cumbria, Buckinghamshire, Somerset and Northamptonshire, to name but a few. The logic is that by having fewer councils and only one tier rather than two, things can be made simpler, more efficient and better suited to local needs. Now, last December, the government published a policy paper called a white paper on the topic of devolution. And this set out how government wanted to replace that two-tier system, like the one we have here in Surrey, with larger unitary councils. Now, LGR and devolution are not just happening here in Surrey, they are happening elsewhere in the country too, notably in Sussex, Hampshire and Kent, just over our borders. However, in Surrey, we're working to some of the most ambitious deadlines. When the government announced deadlines in February, every other area was given until September or November to develop their proposals, with implementation in late 2020s. However, in Surrey, we were given until early May to develop our proposals, with new authorities ready to go from April 2027. Now, when LGR has been done previously in other parts of the country, notably, it has taken years, with quite a lot of pre-planning actually being done before the process was initiated. These timetables, therefore, in Surrey are unprecedented, and I do believe introduce significant risk into the equation.
Like Paul said, we submitted our final proposal to the government for them to consider on the 9th of May. They are now considering it and consulting upon it. In Surrey, there were two proposals submitted, one by Surrey County Council, supported by Elmbridge and Mole Valley councils, to divide the county into two new unitary councils. The other, submitted jointly by the other 9 districts and boroughs, including both Guildford and Waverley, to divide the county into 3 unitary councils that better reflect Surrey's distinct local identities and communities. The government is currently assessing and consulting both of these proposals before they make their decision. It is their decision as to which proposal should be implemented, not any council in Surrey.
Now, as ever, one of my favourite things are maps. So the easiest way to illustrate this bit is with two big maps. This is the two proposals. This is the main element of them, the 2 versus 3 unitaries. I would stress that the proposals themselves do have some more detail underneath them, such as things like how many councillors there are in each division. But the core maps look like this. Now, as you can see on the left, we have the 2 unitary proposal with East and West Surrey, with a population of over 600,000 people, largest in the country, and would cover a very large and diverse area. So for West Surrey, where we would be, it would, for example, stretch from Hazelmere to Staines. This is going to be slightly strange because we would have very rural areas here in the south bordering London in the north, all within that same council. These areas have very little in common in terms of identity, commuting, and I think many of you here will agree, no real sense of community. On the other hand, on the right, we have our 3 unitary proposal with each council having around 400,000. Now, rather than trying to create mega councils, our proposal instead has been developed based on placing areas together that have at least something in common. So in the north, there's an authority that is predominantly urban with suburban areas on the edge of London with good commuting links. In the east, there is a mix of urban and more rural with a good deal of commuting within the area. And there's also strong links north into London and south towards Gatwick Airport. And finally, here in the west, that includes Guildford and Waverley, you have a similar mixture of towns like Guildford, Godalming, Farnham, Hazelmere, Woking and Camberley, and more rural communities, many of which look towards or are centred around Guildford. With our proposal, each council would reflect Surrey's distinct economies, strengths and challenges, rather than placing larger areas together with very little in common. Now, this means the new councils would be able to design and deliver services specifically for their local area, rather than trying to be this one-size-that-fits-all approach that in the end will suit no one.
So, as you've already heard, the government are currently consulting on both of these proposals, and the consultation runs until the 5th of August. This consultation is open to all residents, organisations and businesses to respond to. And unfortunately, the questions are quite technical, and it may be hard to get to grips with what is actually being asked. However, we have developed an easy Q&A that explains how our proposal meets this criteria. And after today's session, we will be sending you all of this information by email. This is the only engagement or consultation the government will be running about this before they make their decision. Therefore, it's the only chance that Surrey's residents will have to have their say on what the local council looks like, probably for the next 50 years.
Now, as Julia has mentioned, the government consultation has started, and the government is currently assessing both proposals against the criteria they set out in February. And what this also means is that the government have accepted that both proposals are viable and that they do meet the criteria that they've set out. Now, you may have heard it said that councils had to give a population of at least 500,000 to be eligible to do this. This is not the case. And the government minister responsible for this has said on a number of occasions, both publicly and privately, that whilst new councils should be larger than the current districts and boroughs, this figure of 500,000 is a national average and the minimum target to me, and not a minimum target to me. It's important to note that the criteria is broad and covers a wide range of topics, but it's about more than just saving money or about creating large remote councils that don't really deliver for the communities that they serve. In fact, it's really important that they can deliver excellent services based on what local people want and need. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit now about why 3 unitaries we believe will be the best to achieve this. And to be clear, when I say we in this case, both Guildford and Waverley have voted in full council to support these positions and are part of the coalition of 9 councils who have put forward the 3 unitary council model. So with our proposal, we took a bottom-up approach. Now, rather than using that 500,000 as a target and drawing boundaries that met this, we worked with the overwhelming majority of Surrey's districts and boroughs to analyse a lot of the evidence, the data, to understand where these boundaries already exist on the ground and how the new council boundaries could best align with these, rather than imposing something unfamiliar and just slightly strange from above. In doing this, we'll create financially sustainable and resilient new councils that deliver considerable savings, allowing more money to be invested in and delivering the frontline services that we need and residents need. We know that the debt issue in Surrey is incredibly high profile, and particularly here in what will either way be the West in some form. And I'm sure that's going to come up in the Q&A, and we're going to do a little bit to address that before we open it up to questions. Now, by bringing together multiple districts and boroughs into these larger organisations, which of course will not only abolish all of those districts and boroughs, but also Surrey County Council, and giving their powers to these new councils, we believe we can achieve significant economies of scale, saving public money and making sure that we protect and possibly even hopefully expand services. All of this will be achieved by creating councils that still have local councillors representing local people. And in our version of this bid for 3 unitaries, there are plans to strengthen community involvement through things like existing towns and parish councils, certainly very important down here in the south, but also neighbourhood partnerships and more direct engagement. Now, the evidence shows that councils work best when they represent and reflect these boundaries, these genuine community natural boundaries, rather than something artificial. And some areas have tried to use neighbourhood area committees to keep things local, but evidence from places like Wiltshire and Somerset shows these also can feel top-down and disconnected. And actually, there has already been some resistance to the government white paper that is starting to flesh these out a little bit more. That's happened in the last week or so. The three unitary model aims to avoid that by keeping councils small enough to stay close to their communities without needing the extra layers that have been proven to not always work.
But it isn't just us that thinks this. When we were developing our full proposal, we ran engagement with residents across Surrey. Over 3,000 people responded from right across the county. When given the choice, nearly 2/3 of them supported the creation of 3 unitary councils, compared to just 17% who favoured the alternative 2 unitary model. In addition, our engagement showed that the public's top priorities for local government were firmly rooted in localism, with many identifying understanding of local issues and local decision-making as their highest priorities.
So why do we think 3 unitaries will best achieve this? Well, our detailed financial analysis shows that the 2 and the 3 unitary configuration for Surrey would both be financially viable. And we know that for sure by the fact that the government has picked both models to consult on. Indeed, one that was not considered viable was the Crawley Reigate model, which has been thrown out because it wasn't viable. Now, whilst it's true that the 2 unitary model would save slightly more money in the shorter term, as the government criteria shows, this process isn't just about saving the most money. It's about delivering better services for local people. And something that I've said a number of times to few audiences is that realistically, like the last time local government was reorganised, this is about the next 50 years and not the next 2 to 5. And so actually saving money in the short run is only part of the equation. We need to make sure that this develops services and viable councils for the next 50 years. And not only does our proposal save over £60 million by year 4, it also creates new councils that can best support their areas. And this once in a generation event, the last time this was done, as I mentioned, was in the 70s, 1974, before I was born. So I'll wait for other advice to come in and tell me how well that went. But we want to make sure that these councils are actually fit for purpose. I mean, our proposal designs councils that are fit to last and don't just focus on those short-term savings. We want to make sure that they are built around the community and deliver local services for the next 50 years.
Well, before we hand over to you and answer any questions that you might have, we just wanted to share the timescales of what comes next. The government's consultation is now live and runs through till the 5th of August. After this, the government will review all the responses before making their decision in the autumn. From there will be a time of transition to make sure the changes go smoothly and that all our services continue uninterrupted for local people. Next May, residents will be able to vote for new councillors, and for the first year, they will be a shadow council. This means that the old councils will still exist and the new councils will be preparing to take over the services for their area. From April 2027, they will become the new authority, and the old councils, including Guildford Borough Council, Waverley Borough Council and Surrey County Council, will cease to exist, and everything will be run by the new council. After this, we're expecting the new strategic authority to be created in 2027, with the election for the new mayor for that taking place in May 2027. So that brings us to the end of our presentation, and now it's over to your questions. So as a reminder, please do keep asking them via the Q&A function and upvoting any that you want answered. You're also very welcome to use the hand raise function if you would like to ask your question yourself, though please do remember that this session is being recorded. Joining us to help Paul and I answer your questions, we have Pedro Vrobel, the Chief Executive of both Guildford and Waverley Borough Councils.
Okay, we're going to just do one little bit extra on debt before we start, because it's a question that keeps coming up and not an unreasonable question at that. So because of the debt situation in Surrey, so you've got debt in Woking, quite a lot of it. You've also got some debt at Surrey County Council level more generally, and you've also got debt in Runnymede and Spelthorne. And so anybody who can read either of those maps will have noted that Guildford and Waverley, under either of the two circumstances, are going to be with Woking, and under the larger version of the West will also be with Spelthorne and Runnymede. And of course, Surrey County Council's own debt will end up being spread quite a lot wider across the county than just one unitary. So Woking's high level of debt of unsecured debt is well publicised, and the government have said they want all new councils to be financially sustainable, which would not be the case if a local authority just inherited this debt from the get-go. The government have indicated that they are planning to commit to financial assistance in advance of any reorganisation, and have indicated that they're looking to provide further details in September as part of the fair funding review. I think the only other bit I just add here, and I'm sure there'll be further questions on this, is that the debt element, although big and shiny and everybody sees this and it's got a lot of talking about it, what we aren't seeing is a general remedying of the issue with local government funding in the first place. We're not seeing changes to council tax bans or indeed extra funding coming into local authorities. And so at the moment, the debt issue for me is crowding out the fact that we also do need to have sustainable councils that can run their services. And at the moment, you only need to look at things like adult social care, children's services, SEN, to see that there just simply isn't enough money in the system. And one of my major issues with this whole process is that is not being dealt with as part of this. So whilst the debt issue is taking up a lot of the oxygen and is the sexy thing to be talking about, it seems, it is one of the very important subjects that the government do need to clarify for us, and not the only one. Pedro, did you want to say anything on debt before we move to the wider Q&A?
No, I think you've covered all of the key points, but if anyone wants to get a bit more into the nerdy and technical detail, I'm more than happy to provide that. Thank you.
And although we haven't got him with us today, we've normally got our shared 151 officer, our chief finance officer, who also has significant experience of not just one, but two iterations of this unitarisation process. And that's been invaluable to making sure that our case is as robust as it can be and based on experience and not just guessing. Right, let's see if we've got any questions to go to. So Mr. Mark Stamp, what is the responsibility split between the unitaries and the mayoral authority? Well, this one's come up a few times and we're not quite sure yet, is unfortunately the answer. You could look at somewhere like Manchester, where there's a sort of a homogenous sort of urban area, and you can see then that things like infrastructure and transport make a lot more sense when you've got that. And if you try to apply that to Surrey, how would that look with sort of 30 to 40 mid to large settlements that are quite disconnected from each other? So some things will work quite well in the mayoral model, some things won't. We're expecting things like highways, adult social care, children's services, the county level services to predominantly stay with the new unitaries. But I think there is definitely some discussion about how shared services might work, and indeed those larger planning infrastructure and power and housing powers that is, I think, arguably going to sit with the mayor. There's also a council of mayors that's being created, which I don't believe Pedro has had its powers articulated either. That the mayors will be, they'll have a seat at. Have I missed anything drastic, Pedro?
Yeah, no in terms of kind of flavour, but this was set out, the last time government set this out in detail was on the 16th of December when in the English Devolution White Paper. At that point in time, what they set out is broadly what Paul described. So actually unitaries will be significantly more able to kind of deal with everyday matters than the two-tier council structure at the moment. So that's really positive. Anyone who's lived in London will have a bit more of a sense of the kind of expectation and the division of labour between mayors and unitaries, but consider unitaries to be a kind of beefed up version of what we have now, and the mayoral layer to be kind of a point of potential further devolution. So the way government has described it is responsibility for skills, some of the really strategic type infrastructure, changes to the M25, those sorts of big things that affect Surrey as a whole. Those are the sorts of conversations that or sorts of issues that would come to the mayor, whose role again will be to take a sort of whole of Surrey view as opposed to a kind of unitary itself view. But as Paul set out, that's still kind of what that means in the Surrey context is still quite up for grabs, but that's the broad type of intended distribution between the two levels. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that. We have a question from Mr. Mike Flurry.
Hopefully we'll be able to unmute you.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
It's Jeanette Collings. I'm on the computer and it's logged to him for years. I can't get it off. Yes, I'm part of Guildford Allotment Society, which is quite a big, expansive organisation, covers 15 allotment sites in Guildford. We're concerned where the lease will go. We have 25-year leases ongoing, and we wondered if that would continue as is. We weren't sure how it was all going to be split up, and obviously you're considering the two, which makes it a lot easier, and the impact of that if it did get split up, and would we still receive our, which is probably not the right question at this point, but would we still receive our funding that we get from Guildford Borough Council?
What was your name? Sorry, was it Jeanette?
Jeanette Collings, yeah.
Hi, Jeanette. Thank you so much for your question. I mean, my first thought is that it will continue into the new authority, and then for them to work out what happens next. But I mean, if Paul's got anything.
Well, I would just say, because there are going to be Waverley people on this call as well, allotments are one of the very few statutory powers that sit with town and parish councils where they exist. In fact, I believe it might be the only one that they actually have. And so if your allotment association is attached to a town or parish, and in Waverley that I think is universally the case, nothing will change for you at all. In the Guildford context, assuming there is no creation of any intermediate level such as a town council, that contract and lease would novate over to the new unitary, would be my understanding.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Pedro, did you want to add anything to that?
No, yes. There will be a number of contracts, and it won't just be about kind of allotments. It will be, you know, waste contracts, housing contracts, repairs contracts, etc., etc.
Yeah.
They will all novate. That is the starting assumption. What then happens subsequently is down to the new unitaries to determine, and that's a point we do need to make, because you know, we can only say what's going to happen up until the point of change.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
There are genuinely a couple of Godalming allotment holders on this call, though, I can see. So yours will stay with Godalming Town Council for those of you that can hear me. Right, we've got, I think, then Becky Jeffrey, who is the Chief Executive of South West Surrey Citizens Advice, who has asked, what steps would you recommend community organisations start taking in preparation for the new unitary authorities? Well, the very first one I'd say you're already doing, which is by taking part in this and trying to see what's going on. And learn how that's going to work. We will, over the next few months, be starting to look at the transition rearrangements up until the elections for the shadow authority. Certainly, I would, if I were you, get involved in the pre-discussions before the elections with, and also engage with people who want to stand in that election. And after that, the shadow unitary itself. Pedro, I think it's probably just worth you commenting here, because of course Becky's organisation is one that receives a reasonable amount of money from both Guildford and Waverley, both of which won't be here to do it anymore. And bearing in mind how fundamental her organisation is, this is something that we do need to be thinking about quite seriously, I would say. Yep,
I entirely agree with that. And Becky, your question, as ever, is incredibly helpful in opening up a sort of broader point for all of us, which is that ahead of so the next step, as Julia and Paul set out earlier in the process, is that there will be a election once the decision's made on 3 or 2 unitaries. There will be a election in May, and the result of that election will shape a shadow authority. Between now and vesting day, which is when the new organisation comes into play, which will be April 27. Sorry for all the dates being thrown at you. Between all of those periods, what the shadow authority is going to be doing is working through what is the delivery model for each one of the sort of services that it needs to deliver. And I would strongly suspect that making sure that, you know, understanding what the community services model is kind of one of the key things that the shadow unitary will want to get on top of. But in the first instance, we should assume that kind of things continue, because that's probably the easiest thing for shadow unitaries to do. But after that, the new unitary will want to take a decision about what its kind of operating model is. But in the meantime, I think the most important thing is to do exactly as Paul said, engage now, with which you're doing, and you know, we should pick this up offline as well and have further conversations about what could happen next. But I will drop you an email, Becky, so we can pick that up. Thank you.
And actually, Pedro, one other factor on that one as well that I'd quite like to explore, certainly with Becky's organisation, but I'm sure others, where Woking has not been funding some of these organisations for some years because of their financial difficulties, it's probably worth us understanding where there are gaps compared to, say, Guildford and Waverley by comparison to Woking, as I'm sure there will be after 5 years of no money being spent on that in those areas. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Becky, for the question. Okay, moving on now. I can see another hand up. Is that Sonia? Would you like to ask your question? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. So, Sonia, I run a service supporting people with learning disabilities to the west of Surrey. And I suppose my question is kind of a question and just a bit of a side note, well, a big note, really. I think it's already starting to impact on us because we've really started noticing the difference in adult social services response times through duty team. We've noticed it could be entirely coincidental. But obviously, when things like this are happening, you know, I'm responsible for an organisation of about a 6 million turnover, and I understand the impact in my organisation of significant change being announced. So I can't imagine it, the scale that's being discussed. But access to duty teams, reviews of services, slowdowns on tenders that would have previously sat under Surrey County Council, and it's having a significant and real impact on people's lives. And I wondered, especially with your note, Paul, about, you know, the biggest risk being the speed of implementation. You know, and just hearing the notion that election in May to a shadow authority and then, you know, the new organisation picking up in 2027. And my experience of change at this scale is it is not double funded for that period. So, you know, with all the other shifts and transitions that are going on, I just wondered what special consideration is being given to those people that are in receipt of lifelong services, because as organisations, I can see them, you know, they're collapsing around us. And this will just be an additional pressure on what consideration or special focus group is being given to organisations like ourselves.
So a couple of elements there. Did you want to go first?
I just want to say, yeah, thank you, Sonia, for that, for your question and for your thoughts on the impact that you're seeing at the moment. I think it's really important to stress that we said earlier that this is a very the timescale on this is very quick, but it's really important that we make sure that there is no interruption as far as possible to services. So I'm sure Paul will want to add something.
Well, I mean, I think I'll start with the caveat that I should do, because we are, both of us, politicians, and we are also county councillors in opposition at the county. And I say that just so that you're aware, in case it in any way colours the comments that I'm going to make. But in my opinion, adult social care and children's services has been strained for some time, predating this, and that does appear to be escalating. I don't necessarily think it's entirely because of local government reorganisation, but I would say that there is clearly going to be an additional impact on that. I mean, at the end of the day, the county has, I think, 15,000 staff, if you have all those with the maintained schools added in as well. And undertaking this sort of activity, this sort of change programme, even in a planned way, would have, I think, put some concerns amongst those staff. I also think it is having a little bit of an issue in terms of tendering process, procurement, and a few of those other areas that you've mentioned. Some of these are being highlighted at the county as recently as today. We've been talking about the impact on county staff and about its potential impact on services. So some of this is being at least noted by the county, and hopefully they'll start taking that a little bit more seriously than they are. Pedro, I believe we've got some transitional funding from the government that is the purpose of which is to help this process. But Sonia, I think I do need to be kind of realistic here. There are reasons why people like myself and Julia have opposed at the county level the process being started, not because we're against this whole reorganisation as a concept, but because the speed that it's being done introduces additional specific risk, particularly to vulnerable people. I think realistically, we know that is an issue, and I think we've got a collective responsibility to try and help as much as we can. Pedro, do you want to add anything to that?
Just to confirm that we do have transitional funding, but it's really tiny. It's £380,000 for the entirety of Surrey. So all that really does is pay for a little bit of the teams we're using to try and manage some of the transformation that we're kind of going through at the moment. But I think, you know, I can't speak for county, and you wouldn't expect me to, but or any of those county services. But what we are all doing as chief executives of the districts and boroughs and the chief executives across Surrey is trying to work through how we get ourselves through all of this and take the opportunity to improve rather than degrade public services as we move from one to the other. And you can see all the potential advantages that a unitary can bring, like being able to kind of bring planning and infrastructure decisions together. Like, there are real sort of potential benefits in all of this, but what we can't allow to happen is services to kind of tail off or degrade in the sort of run up to that. So I know everybody will be working really hard to do that, and certainly that's one of the things we've got our eye on in Guildford and Waverley. And I want to hear about it if you're seeing anything start to kind of move in that direction here. But we can take that message back to county as well if you'd like us to.
Yeah, I think it's genuinely really important. You know, we're quite a robust organisation, but some really significant organisations doing really important work, in my view, are directly suffering. So if that's a genuine offer, Pedro, it'd be great if I can offer some case studies of where I think the impact is real. I don't think there's any issue with the overall. I agree, you know, and I think organisationally we agree with the removal of a two-tier system, but £318,000 is a laughable number. That wouldn't even cover the cost of rebranding. That's probably the tea and biscuit budget for the process when you think about the amount of people involved. But if that's genuine, I'd very much appreciate your email address so I can send you some information about it.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll drop you a message. I should reiterate that I don't work for the county, but I'm more than happy to pass that on.
Yeah, or yeah, whoever I should pass it on to.
we can assist with that. So one thing I would also just add as well, and I think this is a fear I would express particularly to this group, with the removal of these current districts and boroughs, many of them which, other than say Woking, are actually reasonably solvent. Both Guildford and Waverley certainly are. We also dole out quite a lot of discretionary funds, a lot of them to organisations that do this sort of work. With the way the unitaries are likely to be set up, a combination of the debt issue and also the regular local government funding issues, it is likely that discretionary spend is going to decrease. And I'm also concerned about the impact that's going to have on lots of the sort of organisations that I see represented here. Julia, next question.
The next question is from Mark Stamp. Thank you. Are there any plans for Guildford Town Council as Godalming has? So obviously there's been some conversation in the public, and we've had some questions come through to us in recent months about this. So what we're doing is we committed, I think, at the last council meeting to actually bring back a report with the terms of reference for something called a community governance review, which is a way we can engage with all the parts of Guildford Borough that are unparished, to give them information about what options there are for this kind of governance going forward. And we've got a report coming to exec this week. And then if exec agrees for it to be recommended to full council on the 29th of July, there will be a debate and a vote on moving forward with that community governance review.
And on that one, I'm horribly biased because I don't think anywhere has a town council like Godalming has. So the next question is from Terry Daubney, who is the chairman of the Waverley Tenants Panel. Terry, thank you for your question. So as it stands, the social housing that is currently held by the districts and boroughs that still have their social housing would move into the new unitary. So Surrey Heath does not. Woking does. Obviously Guildford and Waverley both do, so that's sort of about 15,000 I think for in this end. I'm fairly sure Runnymede do, and I think Spelthorne do as well. So you're likely to be in the sort of 20,000 plus kind of quantum of housing for that area, and it would certainly be my hope that social housing be retained by the new unitary, and certainly if it's anything to do with me, that's something that I very much care about. Julia too, I'm sure. So this is a case of, we would love that to be the case. It should start off that way because that's where it will move to. But it will be up to that new unitary authority to make those decisions. I think what it would do, though, is bring together so much housing that it would be easier for that new unitary, say, for example, to create an in-house repairs company instead of relying on outside contractors. The scale might allow us to do some of the things that we would have liked to have done in our borough hats. We've just not simply had the scale and capacity to do that. So that's what I would love to see, Terry. But it is all the responsibility of the new unitary when it comes into existence, I'm afraid. Okay, next question. So this effectively is asking whether a Surrey mayoral authority, a Surrey strategic authority with a mayor, is really going to be strategic enough. And actually, that's something that we've had a discussion about as the Surrey Council leaders group of 12 of us. In that 1.2 million people in Surrey would put it on the very small side for mayoral strategic authorities. And it was certainly discussed at one point whether Surrey and Sussex combined might make a more serious prospect. The arguments that were put, well, there's a couple of arguments that have been put. The first is that Surrey's GVA, its gross value added, its economic footprint, is sufficiently comparable to some of these other mayoral footprints that it can act independently and still make sense. Pedro, I'd have to just double check this, but until the government have actually made a decision on the subject, isn't this still an open question technically?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
No decision has been made yet, so it is within government's ability to determine what it wishes to.
And as Becky Jeffries put in the chat, there are a few areas within Surrey and Sussex that are likely moving to be coterminous, such as sectors of the health service. So these are clearly still ongoing discussions. Okay,
but there is a
question.
Sorry, Paul. There is an important point that Rob's raising here, in that in London, it's really obvious what is a strategic issue and what is a unitary issue, even to the point that road markings are different. So you can see a sort of TfL road compared to a borough road. So so there is a question, which is, and you know, this comes to one of the questions when you're considering what's the right answer from a unitary perspective. Anyone who's a psychologist will be able to tell you that having if you have 3 unitaries, it's much easier to well, if you've only got kind of one mayoral authority, one mayor and 2 unitaries, what is the distinction between strategic against local? That becomes much more blurred than in a 1:32 model. And from a psychological perspective, I do think there's a big difference between 1:2 and 1:3. I don't think that's by any stretch of the imagination the best argument for 3 unitary, and the best arguments are the ones that Paul went through, but it is a relevant consideration when you're coming at this from that perspective. So I just wanted to make that point.
As I was just reminded here in the room, one of the points behind the Reigate Crawley attempt that they made was also effectively trying to reflect on this point. Gatwick particularly being a shared economic zone between the 2 counties that they were arguing should be together rather than split. I'm not entirely sure whether I'm pretty sure that the reasons why the government opted not to make that something to consult on, therefore not viable, was not really about the mayoral question. It was about the specifics of the Reigate Crawley bid itself. But it didn't make it didn't meet the criteria. But the wider discussion about Surrey and Sussex as a single strategic authority is clearly still going on.
Yeah. And that segues nicely into another question from Mark Stamp. Will the strategic authority boundary be decided in the current consultation, or will that be a later decision?
Well, it is a later decision. The only boundaries that are being fixed by this process, or I should say confirmed by this process, are the internal divisional boundaries of Surrey. So at the moment, there's 1 councillor per division. I, for example, am the county councillor for Godalming South, Milford and Whitley. Those boundaries, as would have been run in the May elections that were cancelled this year, are now going to be the fixed divisional boundaries, and with them the fixed boundary of Surrey is again confirmed as it is. So other than that, everything else still is a bit fluid.
We don't seem to have any more questions yet. Anybody?
Going once.
Yeah. Anybody
Right.
want to ask any questions? Make any comments? Ask about the consultation? Hopefully, we've provided you with enough information that's.
Can I come in?
Yes. Who's that? Sorry.
I'm Chris Meeks.
Hi, Chris. How you doing?
Hello. All right. Thank you, all of you, this afternoon. Very much appreciated. It's obviously quite a challenge sorting all this out and understanding it. My question, I wanted to home in onto one particular aspect because I deal with Friends of the Earth in Waverley on transportation issues. I particularly wanted to home in on rights of way. Now, we have considerable expertise within the Surrey County Council existing rights of way department, and I'm really interested for any possible idea of how things might emerge out of all this, whether, for example, if we could, the ideal, I guess, would be to retain intact the existing department, but perhaps politically orchestrated by representatives of the new authorities. I'm just feeling my way on this, but I just wonder if you've got any thoughts there, because over recent years there's been a marked deterioration on the rights of way issues, but largely, I suspect, because of reduction in government funding for rights coming through the system to local authorities. So I don't know if you can throw any light at all.
So, Chris, one of the things that is a little bit easier with that question is that only the county have a rights of way team and a highways team. So they will almost certainly get split up into east, west, northwest, however this ends up going down. In terms of them having any more funding than they already have, that the highways function, as I'm sure you'd expect me to remind everybody, has been grossly underfunded for years. And that particular area of the highways function is no different. And you and I know that well, Chris, in the more rural parts of Waverley, trying to get a right of way dealt with is incredibly difficult. But because there aren't such teams within the boroughs and districts, the more general answer to this question about staff is that all staff will be 2P'd over using that legislation into the new unitary councils. In the case of things where they are unique to the county or unique to the district and boroughs, that is obviously a slightly different dynamic. But I'm expecting there not to be a great deal of impact, to be quite honest, to things as relatively niche. I mean that with no disrespect, relatively niche as the right of ways team at the county highways function. Okay, but I will check in with them with highways next time I'm over in Reigate.
What occurs to me is where you get an integrated team like the existing rights of way team who are working together, how do you divide them up into 3 different sections, because they're so interrelated?
Chris, we actually had this conversation at the county this morning, that in the main, if there is an obvious way to divide the teams that we're talking about, that's what they try and do. So, for example, the rights of way team, just to go to your specific one, the rights of way team are actually organised in different geographic blocks anyway. So individual officers will probably more logically belong to one of the new unitaries than the other, and that's how the team will get split. As a second principle, they look at where staff are travelling from and to as part of their work, so that they can try and offer an equitable solution for that member of staff. And after that, then, of course, it gets more into the sort of legal HR and technical side. But in the main, they try and logically break those services down. And that the reason I go into that in such depth for the rights of way is that also applies to things like adult social care and children's services. They're divided up into local geographies anyway, and those staff will logically fit into a unitary within that geography as it is now.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so I don't think we have any more questions, what I can see. So just to remind you then, please, the consultation is obviously live. It's live until the 5th of August. And I think it's really important that obviously that you have your say. All of you, all your organisations can respond to that consultation, as can your staff. So please do share this information with them and anyone else that you know that lives, works or lives and works in Surrey who'd like to take part in that consultation. Obviously, you know our position. You know that we think that the 3-unit tree proposal is the right answer. But obviously, what's more important to us is that you have your say. So whether you think that or you have a different view, it's really important that you take part in the consultation. So it just remains for us to thank you for joining us at this session today and for all your questions. And I think we'll be hopefully emailing out a copy of this recording, and I think Q&As of the session. So thank you so much for your time. We hope that you found it really interesting and helpful. And please do go and have your say and complete the consultation. Thanks, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.